She almost didn't take the shift. That's the part that haunts her now. The part she replays every single night when she closes her eyes and sees his face looking up at her from that leather chair, 4 bodyguards standing behind him like statues carved from granite. The entire restaurant holding its breath, wine glasses trembling slightly from the tension in the air. She almost called in sick. She almost let Maria cover for her. She almost stayed home. But she didn't. And because she didn't, everything changed for him, for her, and for every person sitting in that dining room who witnessed something they would spend the rest of their lives struggling to explain. Her name was Elizabeth Vasquez, and she was nobody. That was the first thing you needed to understand about her. She was 26 years old. She drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked rear bumper. She owed $11,000 in student loans for a linguistics degree. She told everyone was useless, and she worked the dinner shift 4 nights a week at Rosario's, the most expensive restaurant in the city, the kind of place where a single bottle of wine cost more than her monthly rent. She tied her apron in the back parking lot every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, walked through the service entrance, clocked in without complaint, and did her job with the quiet, practiced efficiency of someone who had learned very early in life that the world moved forward whether you were ready or not. The other servers liked her. The kitchen staff respected her. Her manager, a nervous little man named Philip who wore short-sleeved dress shirts and sweated through them constantly, considered her his most reliable employee. She didn't cause drama. She didn't call in late. She didn't flirt with the guests or over-explain the specials or linger too long at tables where the tips looked promising. She took the order. She brought the food. She smiled when it was appropriate and disappeared when it was. She was nobody. And then the black SUVs pulled up. It started the way all unforgettable nights start, with something that seems completely ordinary. Elizabeth was refilling water glasses at table 7 when she heard the front door open. She didn't look up immediately because doors open constantly at a restaurant. People come and people go. That is the entire nature of the business. But something made the air change, a shift in pressure almost like the moment before a thunderstorm when the atmosphere pulls itself tight and every living thing goes very, very still. She looked up. There were 5 of them. 4 men in black suits positioned themselves just inside the entrance with the practiced ease of people who had stood in doorways like this many times before. Not threatening, exactly, not visibly armed, just present in a way that made every other person in the room seem slightly less real by comparison. They had the kind of stillness that only comes from absolute certainty. These were men who had never once in their adult lives been unsure of what would happen next, because they were always the ones who decided. And then there was the 5th man. He walked through the door last, which Elizabeth would later understand was deliberate. You send the wall of muscle in first, let the room absorb the shock of them, and then you walk in yourself so that by the time you arrive, the audience is already primed. He was seated before Elizabeth had even fully processed what she was looking at. Gray suit, beautifully cut, no tie, top button of his white shirt open in a way that suggested he had once worn a tie, and had simply decided somewhere along the way that he was done with them. Dark hair swept back from a strong face. A jaw that looked like it had been designed specifically to make decisions. A neck tattoo that disappeared beneath his collar, just the edge of it visible, like the tip of something much larger hiding beneath the surface. He sat down in the leather chair at table 1, the best table in the house, the corner table, the table that Philip kept permanently reserved for what he called special circumstances. And he opened the menu with the unhurried ease of a man who had never once waited for anything. The 4 bodyguards arranged themselves behind him. The restaurant went quiet. Not fully quiet, there was still the sound of the kitchen, the distant clink of silverware, the muted jazz playing through the overhead speakers. But the human noise stopped. The conversations died. 23 people sitting at 11 tables all found a reason to look somewhere else and say absolutely nothing. Philip appeared at Elizabeth's elbow so quickly she startled. "Table 1, he whispered, his voice stretched thin with something she couldn't immediately name. "Take table 1. "That's not my section," she said. "It is tonight." He was already walking away. "Please, Elizabeth, just please." She looked at table 1. The man was still reading the menu. The 4 men behind him were still not moving. She picked up her notepad and walked over. Up close, he was even more composed than he appeared from across the room. That was the first thing she noticed. Not his looks, not the bodyguards, not the weight of whatever invisible authority he was wearing like a second suit. It was the composure. He read the menu the way other people read things they have already memorized, not searching, just confirming. His eyes moved slowly down the page. He turned it over. He considered the wine list with what appeared to be genuine, unhurried interest. He did not look up when she arrived at the table. She waited. This was a test. She understood that instinctively, without knowing anything about him. He was not ignoring her out of rudeness exactly. He was establishing something. He was letting her know, without saying a word, that his attention was something she would receive when he decided to give it, and not a moment before. She kept her face neutral. She had served difficult people before. Senators, a famous quarterback, a tech billionaire who had sent back 3 separate appetizers without explanation. She knew how to wait. After approximately 30 seconds, which felt considerably longer, he closed the menu, placed it on the table with geometric precision and looked up at her. His eyes were dark and very direct, not unkind, but not warm either. They were the eyes of someone who had long ago stopped seeing people as sources of comfort or danger and had simply begun seeing them as variables. "Buonasera," he said. His voice was low and even, with an accent she could hear immediately, not heavy, not theatrical, but real. The vowels were slightly rounder than they should be for American English, the consonants landing with a deliberate weight. "Good evening." She felt the room tighten around her. From the corner of her eye she could see Philip near the hostess stand, watching. She could feel the attention of the other diners, careful, sideways attention, the kind people deploy when they want to observe something without appearing to. She said, "Buonasera, benvenuto a Rosario's. Posso portare qualcosa di bere mentre esamina il menu." "Good evening, welcome to Rosario. May I bring you something to drink while you look at the menu?" The silence that followed was different from the silence that had preceded it. The man with the gray suit looked at her for a long moment without speaking. The composure didn't crack. It was more that something shifted behind his eyes, a slight recalibration, like a machine encountering unexpected input and taking a moment to process it. Then slowly the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, the suggestion of one, the ghost. "Lei parla Italiano," he said. "It wasn't a question, you speak Italian." "Un po'," she said, "a little." Then, deciding something. "Abbastanza." "Enough." He studied her for another moment. Then he said in Italian, still speaking quietly enough that only she could hear him clearly, "How interesting. I've been in this country for 6 days and no one has spoken to me in my own language." "Not once." She replied in Italian, matching his register exactly, not performing, not showing off, just speaking. Then this must feel either very welcome or very suspicious. He looked at her, really looked at her, the first time she felt like an actual person in his field of vision rather than a variable to be categorized. "Suspicious," he said, "almost certainly, and yet." He paused, strangely welcome. Behind him, one of the bodyguards shifted his weight. The others remained motionless. Elizabeth kept her pen above her notepad and her expression professionally pleasant, which required more effort than usual because she was also, underneath the professionalism, becoming acutely aware that she was standing at the center of something much larger than a dinner order. She had grown up with Italian the way some people grow up with music, not formally, not through study, but through immersion. Her grandmother had come from a small village outside Naples and had never fully surrendered to English, conducting entire conversations with Elizabeth in a language that the rest of the family found impenetrable, and Elizabeth had absorbed the way children absorb things, which is completely and without effort. The linguistics degree had given her the architecture around what she already knew instinctively. She understood the language not just in words, but in the spaces between them. The pauses that meant one thing, the particular way certain phrases landed in formal versus informal registers, the subtle signals of class and region that lived in vowel sounds. She understood, for instance, that this man was from the north. Milan, she guessed, or near it. The accent had that crispness, that slight precision in the consonants that distinguished northern Italian speech from the warmer, more expansive dialect of her grandmother's Naples. She understood that he was educated. She understood that he was accustomed to people who did not understand him. And she understood, because she was paying very close attention, that something in his posture had changed since she'd responded in his language. Not much. The composure was still there, still absolute. But there was a microscopic loosening somewhere in the set of his shoulders, like a fist very slightly, involuntarily opening. "The branzino," he said in Italian. "Is it fresh?" "It came in this morning," she said. "The chef does it with a lemon butter and caper sauce, and I'd suggest the roasted fennel on the side rather than the asparagus, because the fennel stands up better to the acidity." "You have opinions about the food." "I have opinions about most things," she said. "The fennel is better." He was quiet for a moment, then, "And the wine?" "For branzino, there's a 2019 Vermentino from Sardinia on the list that I think you'll prefer to the more obvious choices. It has a salinity that works with the fish in a way that the other whites don't." He looked at her again with that same direct, measuring quality, and then he said something that she had not expected. He said, in Italian, very quietly, "Who are you?" She didn't answer immediately. She let the pause exist, which was itself a kind of answer. "I'm your server," she said finally. "That's not what I asked." "I know," she said. And she held his gaze for just a moment longer than was professionally appropriate. And then she clicked her pen and made a note on her pad and said, in English, with a perfectly pleasant smile, "I'll put in your order. The wine will be out shortly." She turned and walked back toward the kitchen, and the sound that followed her, or rather, the absence of sound, felt like a held breath, like the entire room was waiting to see what came next, like 23 people had just watched the opening move of a chess game they didn't fully understand but couldn't look away from. Philip intercepted her at the service station. What did he say? His voice was barely above a whisper. "What were you two? What language was that?" "Italian," she said. "You speak Italian." "Apparently." "Elizabeth." He grabbed her arm, then released it immediately as though he'd remembered it wasn't appropriate. "Do you know who that is?" She looked at him. "Tell me." He glanced around, then leaned in so close she could smell the coffee on his breath. "His name is Marco Ferrante. He's Elizabeth. He's not someone you joke with. He's not someone you be clever with, okay? Just take his order, just be normal. Don't do whatever you were just doing." "I was taking his order," she said, in Italian. "He spoke to me first." Philip stared at her. "Just be careful," he said. "Please, just be very, very careful." She thought about that as she submitted the order, and pulled the Vermentino from the wine rack, and wiped down the bottle with a clean cloth. She thought about the way the name Marco Ferrante hung in the air like something with physical weight. She thought about the four men standing behind his chair like they'd been grown there. She thought about the way he'd asked, "Who are you?" and hadn't meant, "What's your name?" She carried the wine back to table 1. He tasted it with the focus of someone who was actually interested, not performing interest. He let it sit on his palate for a moment, then set the glass down. "Excellent," he said in Italian. "I know," she said. He almost smiled again. "Sit down," he said. "I'm working." "I'm asking you to sit down." "I'm your server," she said. "I don't sit with guests. It would be inappropriate." "Many things are inappropriate," he said. "That hasn't generally stopped them from happening." She considered this. "I'll stand," she said. "What would you like to talk about?" "I want to know," he said, very carefully, "how a woman who speaks Italian like someone who learned it from their grandmother ends up working in a restaurant like this." "My grandmother was from Naples," Elizabeth said. "She only spoke Italian, and I needed a job." "You have a linguistics degree," he said. She felt the floor shift very slightly beneath her. "I didn't tell you that." "No," he said. He didn't explain further. He simply looked at her with those dark, direct eyes, and she understood, with a clarity that moved through her like cold water, that he had known who she was before she arrived at the table. That the whole exchange, the Italian greeting, the deliberate testing, the question, "Who are you?" none of it had been spontaneous. He had been looking for something, and she had given it to him. "What do you want?" she said, dropping all pretense of customer service. "Your grandmother," he said, "was Carmela Vasquez, born Carmela Rixai, from a village called Quindasai in the province of Avellino." She said nothing. "Your mother moved to this country when you were 3 years old," he continued, his voice the same quiet, even register it had been all evening. "Your grandmother followed 2 years later. She died when you were 19. You have a photograph of her on your desk at home. You still write in Italian sometimes, your private journals." The room was completely silent now, every table. The jazz still played, but it felt very far away. "She owed a debt," Marco Ferrante said. "Your grandmother, to my grandfather. It was a very old debt from a very long time ago, and it was never collected because my grandfather chose not to collect it because he respected her. But debts don't disappear, they transfer." "I don't have money," Elizabeth said. Her voice was steady. She was genuinely surprised by that. "I know," he said. "I don't want money." He picked up his wine glass. "I want a translator." She stared at him. "I have," he said carefully, "a meeting tomorrow with 7 people who speak 4 different languages, and matters of considerable importance are going to be decided. And I need someone in that room who I can trust to hear everything accurately and tell me exactly what is said." He set the glass down. "Not an interpreter I hire through a service, not someone who can be influenced. Someone who understands the language the way you do, which is not a professional understanding but a human one. Someone who hears what is meant, not just what is said." "You found me," Elizabeth said slowly, "because of my grandmother." "I found you," he said, "because you are exactly what I need. The grandmother is why I trust it." Elizabeth looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at the 4 men behind him, still motionless, still carved from granite, still watching her with expressions that revealed absolutely nothing. Then she looked around the restaurant at the 23 people who were absolutely not looking at her and absolutely hearing everything. "I have a shift tomorrow," she said. He looked at her, the ghost of that almost smile again. "I'll pay your month's wages," he said, "for 3 hours of your time." 2 months, she said, a pause. "Done," he said. "And you'll tell me," she said, "exactly what I'm walking into before I walk into it, complete information. As much as I can give you." "That's not what I said." He studied her. "You're not afraid," he said. It was an observation, not a compliment. "I'm extremely afraid," she said. "I'm just better at being afraid than most people." He was quiet for a long moment. The wine glass sat between them, the vermentino catching the light from the chandeliers overhead. Somewhere in the kitchen, a timer went off. The jazz track changed. "Your branzino will be ready soon," Elizabeth said. "Yes," said Marco Ferrante. "I'll bring it out when it's ready." "Yes." She turned to go, and then stopped, and said over her shoulder, in Italian, in her grandmother's specific dialect, the warm and round and southern way of saying it that was nothing like his northern crispness. "My grandmother used to say that a debt paid in a language someone loves is worth more than gold." She didn't wait to see his expression. She walked back to the kitchen, hung the ticket on the rail, leaned against the wall for exactly 4 seconds to let her heart race and then settle, and then she straightened up, smoothed her apron, and went back to work. The branzino was perfect. She knew it before she plated it. She set it in front of him with steady hands and refilled his wine and asked if there was anything else he needed, and he said no, Not tonight. And she nodded and moved to the next table as though nothing had happened at all. But before she left, he said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "Be at the Hotel Meridian at 9 tomorrow morning. Ask for Luca at the front desk. He'll bring you up." She wrote nothing down. She nodded once. "Elizabeth," he said. She stopped. "My grandfather would have liked your grandmother to know that the debt he forgave was forgiven freely. It was not a burden he carried. He forgave it because she deserved to be free of it." He paused. "I thought you should know that." She stood still for a moment. Something moved through her that she didn't have an immediate name for. Something old and complicated and almost painful in the way that certain kinds of relief are painful. "Thank you," she said. She walked away. At table 4, a couple who had been sitting in concentrated, deliberate silence for the last 40 minutes finally looked at each other. The woman reached across the table and took the man's hand. The man exhaled slowly, like someone who had been holding his breath underwater and had finally broken the surface. Nobody in the restaurant said anything for another full minute. And then, slowly, conversation resumed. Glasses clinked. Forks scraped plates. The jazz came back into focus. The room filled itself back in. But it was different now, lighter, somehow, and heavier at the same time. The way air feels after lightning. Charged with the memory of what it had just held. Elizabeth worked her remaining tables with the same efficiency she always brought to the job. She smiled when it was appropriate. She brought the check when it was requested. She folded napkins at the service station between courses and restocked the bread basket, and answered a question about the dessert menu without once looking toward table 1. At 9:45, Marco Ferrante left. He stood without ceremony, and his 4 men moved around him like water around a stone, and he walked to the door and was gone without looking back. He left a tip that was exactly double the bill. And tucked beneath the wine glass on a small piece of folded notepaper were 4 words. She unfolded it when the table was clear. Stood reading it in the candlelight, the linen white around her, the restaurant emptying behind her. In her grandmother's dialect, not his northern sharpness, but her grandmother's warm and southern Italian, he had written, "Coraggio piccola. Sei pronta." "Courage, little one, you're ready." She stood there for a long time. She folded the note and put it in the pocket of her apron, next to her pen and her notepad and the $11 in cash tips from table 7. She clocked out at 10:30. She drove home in her 2009 Honda Civic with the cracked rear bumper. And when she sat down at her desk, in front of the photograph of her grandmother, Carmela Rixai, from Quindasai in the province of Avellino, who had carried something heavy for a very long time and had never once put it down. Elizabeth Vasquez opened her journal and wrote 3 words in Italian, the language she had inherited like a gift she hadn't known she was receiving until the moment she needed it. She was nobody. Until tonight, when the most dangerous man in the room discovered that nobody was exactly who he had been looking for. And everything she had ever been, the degree everyone told her was useless, the grandmother everyone had told her to remember politely and move on from, the language that lived in her like a second heartbeat. Everything had been, without her knowledge, without her consent, without any plan at all, preparing her for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. She closed the journal, set her alarm, and tried with limited success to sleep. Tomorrow, she would walk into a room full of men,